What's up YouTube, Dale here from Zephyr, and today I am bringing you my first place undefeated profile for Yubel. That's right, I took this deck to my local environment, the exact same one that went second place last time. I've made some minor adjustments, different kind of playstyle, and of course some different matchups, and I was able to go throughout the entire day undefeated. Round 1 was a rematch against Snake Eyes that I ended up losing to in the final last week, and I was luckily able to win that one. It basically came down to a misplay. They activated a card in an imperm column, and then was not able to kind of regain the lead from that point on. Game number 2 was against Ritual Beast. Now this was a deck that I was a little bit fearful of because I didn't know exactly what the deck could fully do. I knew what it was kind of semi-capable of, but I didn't know that its route of play and its lines and everything else. But luckily I was able to play through their hand traps game 1 and build up a board that they couldn't break. And in game 2 I was able to open up Imperm and Nibiru so that when they tried to make the Protoss lock, I was able to Nibiru them before they could get into anything like Appaloosa to protect. And then ultimately I was able to kind of crack back and win from that point on. Game number 3 was against Evil Eyes. Now this is the exact same player that got 122 out of 1,300 people at UK Nationals, so they definitely know what they're doing with the deck, and it can see that it's already caused a lot of issues to a lot of decks out there in the current meta. So that again was a very, very good game, and I was able to come out of that one as the victor. Moving into the final round of the day, this was up against Chimera Illusion. Now unfortunately I drew this one, but game 1 was a back and forth slogfest of a 13-minute duel. Game 2, which I ended up losing that one. Game 2 I ended up winning in about 5 minutes or so. I was able to kind of do full combo of my Yubel board. They were unable to break it, and then we moved into game 3. Unfortunately, with only 2 minutes left on the clock, he had to decide to go first, because otherwise he'd let me go first and I was on Gustav Max. That burn damage may have been exactly what it needed to get game, so they had to take their time. They were able to kind of play through their turn as fast as they possibly could, but then wasn't able to finish it before time was called, and ultimately ended in a draw. So with all of that out of the way, I'm going to take you through the profile. I'm going to give you as much detail and breakdown as possible. I'll also show you the side deck as well, and talk about what I put in, what I put out, and why I chose that particular lineup. So with all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more upcoming content. So starting off with the first cards, of course we are playing Yubel and we are playing Terra Incarnate. Pretty straightforward and simple on this one. These are obviously the ones you want to be looping back to make your Phantom of Yubel as much as possible. It's very rare that you want to be using Spirit of Yubel, and one thing that a lot of people didn't know is that you can actually make Phantom by spinning back from the graveyard, field, or the hand. So there was a time where I opened up Yubel and Terra Incarnate that I baited out my opponent by activating 1-for-1, discarding a Terra Incarnate, and then once they did that I was able to go, okay cool, well spin back one of the monsters in my hand, spin back Terra Incarnate, make my Phantom of Yubel, and from that point on I was protected. And they ultimately, in the Evil Eye matchup specifically, they went Ash Blossom, Droll Lockbird, which I had to Phantom in order to continue to make my plays, and then Nibiru'd me, and I was still able to come through the other side of that because I was able to interact with their board and still was able to keep on playing with all of the access to stuff like opening Spirit Gates, plus Grave Scrummer and everything else. Speaking of Grave Scrummer, well, let's talk about Spirit of Yubel first. So I went with 3 of this one. Spirit of Yubel and Grave Scrummer was definitely a card that I was considering cutting down to 2 when I sided. I still like the idea of having 3 of them because you have no idea how good Grave Scrummer is to allow you to pop the Spirit of Yubel in order to float around and dodge targeted effects. It's absolutely insane. Especially in the Snake Eyes matchup when they were trying to use SP Little Knight, and especially in the Unchained matchup or the Evil Eye Unchained matchup where they were trying to use Rage, being able to dodge the effects were really, really important. So 3 and 3 works an absolute charm, and a lot of people forget the battle effect of Spirit of Yubel, that when they attack you can special summon it down, and then of course that will get you access to Nightmare Pain, but the other is you search out the Nightmare Pain so that they can't destroy it during their turn, and then they've got to try and get past Spirit of Yubel. Even if they negate its effect and destroy it, you're then able to float into Yubel itself, and then that just gives them another monster that can't be destroyed by battle, and you don't take battle damage from it that they need to deal with. Otherwise you're just going to go, okay cool, spin them both back in order to go into a second Phantom of Yubel for the next turn. Then of course your main starter for the Yubel lineup is of course going to be triple Samsara D Lotus. This card's just incredibly good. Now this one being able to tribute itself off, it is kind of like the opposite of what Dark Beckoning Beast is. So this one will hard lose to an Ash Blossom, whereas Dark Beckoning hard loses to an Imperm, which is a bit of an annoyance. But we'll talk about Dark Beckoning a little bit later on, but that's mainly why I am playing Cross Out in this build still. Even though I didn't see it this entire day, I was actually allowed to dodge around and play through quite a lot of hand traps. The deck is very versatile once it gets going, but if they have the right combination of hand traps, it can be a bit of an uphill struggle. One way to help you with that uphill struggle is this card right here, and that is of course Nightmare Throne. This card is absolutely insane and an amazing addition to the deck. So shout out to the WCQ Auckland that I watched it this morning, and it kind of made me remember that this card has 2 effects. You either add or you destroy. And I usually, as autopilot as it is, kind of go, okay, activate Nightmare Throne, search out Dark Beckoning or Samsara. However, what I kind of felt after last week's kind of play where I kept getting impermed and veiled on the Dark Beckoning is Nightmare Throne lets you destroy it in the deck as well. So being able to destroy your Spirit of Yubel will allow you to float into normal Yubel, straight away giving you enough materials to get you into Phantom of Yubel should you need it. But on top of that, what that will allow you to do, if you've already opened up Opening the Spirit Gates, is it allow you to discard a card, bring back Spirit, and you've basically got the exact same combo that your Samsara D Lotus would allow you to do anyway. Which is obviously the benefit of opening up something like Nightmare Throne and your Samsara D Lotus. If you do decide, rather than going for a Dark Beckoning Beast, but you go normal summon Lotus, Tribute of Lotus, and they go Ash, you go, okay, cool, activate Nightmare Throne, destroying deck instead, pretty much do the exact same combo as long as I've opened up Opening the Spirit Gates. So because this is so important, we are playing the one terraforming. Arguably, you could consider something like set rotation if you wanted to, but then it means that you're going to need to put in an additional field spell that you don't want to see yourself and you want to give it to your opponent. Then for the other Yubel spell cards, we are playing 2 Nightmare Pain, followed up by the 1 Mature Chronicle, and of course the 1 Super Poly that you search off of Mature Chronicle. Now, arguably in the scenarios, of course, Mature Chronicle is doing exactly what Eternal Favourite does anyway, just in spell form and a couple of other different effects. But more times than not, of course, you will be using the ability to search out Super Poly, which is exactly what Eternal Favourite does, and then reviving a Yubel, which again is also exactly what Eternal Favourite does. So more and more I've played this, because I've changed up the extra deck and I've taken out the generic Super Poly targets, this was less of an effective card for going second. It still can be very good because unlike Eternal Favourite, you can get this and add this back from the graveyard off of the back of your Opening the Spirit Gates, because that's a lot of things that people forget, is that Opening the Spirit Gates allows you to add back a continuous spell card from the graveyard if controller level 10, which is something I was doing quite a lot today because I was able to add back Nightmare Pains that my opponent had already destroyed. I was able to add back the Mature Chronicle, and I just had basically eternal discard fodder, which is really, really important. The other benefit of Mature Chronicle is if I do decide to go second, or if I do go second, being able to get Mature Chronicle rather than Eternal Favourite will give me that ability to search out a Super Poly to break a board, while also being able to revive a Yubel during my turn, rather than having to wait to flip the trap card for during my opponent's turn. So it is a little bit faster, but it does take up 1 additional slot in the main deck, so that's something you might want to consider depending on how you want to build it. Currently the list is 45 cards, and it did work out quite well for me today, and there's still a couple of little tweaks and changes that I might want to consider, but it's obviously going to change once we get the Fiendsmiths anyway, so I'm not really completely set on any particular lineup. It's just one of them ones to show you different options and what things work, what things don't, and keep kind of playing and testing and making changes as we go. Then for your best normal summon of the entire deck, in my opinion, is the Dark Beckoning Beast. Now, I know people have suggested to me to play the 1 Chaos Summoning Beast. It's something that I am considering, but I feel it's going to be even more effective once we get the Fiendsmiths, as I feel right now it's not as effective. And the idea behind it, for those of you that don't know why people are playing the Chaos Summoning Beast, is it turns your Opening Spirit Gates into a 1-card mini combo. Now what I mean by that is if you hard open up the Opening Spirit Gates, you activate it, you search out a Dark Beckoning, you normal summon a Dark Beckoning, and this will then search you out your Chaos Summoning Beast, which then becomes your additional normal summon off of the back of the Dark Beckoning, and then you're going to put those two together. That can get you into Yama, and then of course as long as you have a discard, you can discard a card, and that would allow you to bring back a Dark Beckoning, or of course a Chaos Summoning, and then you get to use the effect of the Shavara to pop it, and it basically unlocks you either the 5 Princess line, or of course the Unchained into Soul of Rage line as well. Now, more times than not, what you're ideally looking for is you want to be opening up Dark Beckoning rather than the Opening of Spirit Gates. Dark Beckoning to Opening, great success, and a Samsara D Lotus. But then there are those odd occasions where you do open up multiple hand traps or multiple cards that need other cards to work with them and an Opening of Spirit Gates. And that's where you want to be able to go, okay, well, rather than just going Opening Spirit Gates, Dark Beckoning, search out Opening Spirit Gates, you want to be able to go Opening, Beckoning, Chaos, and then continue to make your combo and plays. Obviously, the exact same outcome will happen if you do get impermed or you get ashed on any of these kind of routes of play, but it's just something that gives you an alternative option, and that's something that I will be looking at a little bit more so. Whether I would then feel comfortable to put an Opening Spirit Gates up to 3 or not, I'm still undecided. Personally, 2 has been working absolutely fine for me. 1 did at some point as well, and it's kind of one of them ones that the one benefit was if I did go Opening, Beckoning, back into a second Opening, this just becomes free discard fodder that could be looped back to the hand, as long as I end up controlling a Yubel or a Spirit, because that is the level 10 monster that you're going to need in order to use the second effect to recycle. Speaking of the Unchained engine, we are playing the 1 Shavara, the 1 Shayama, and of course the 1 Abominable Chamber. Now, personally, throughout this entire tournament today, I didn't use Shayama at all, so it's definitely something I can see cutting out. And there are times that when I was siding out, just to kind of make my siding patterns a little bit easier for myself and know exactly what cards I wanted to take out and take in, if I was going second, I would take out the Shayama and the Abominable Chamber, because I was ideally pushing for an OTK, or putting in more effective side deck cards that didn't really have more benefit of me being able to link off my Rage or being able to go into a Triple D High Wave King. If something like a Skill Drain would have been more effective, or a D Barrier might have been more effective, or a D Shifter, or anything else like that that would have conflicted with this particular lineup, allow me to have a bit more of an advantage or an edge against my opponent. Then for the consistency card, I did go with 3 Pot of Prosperity. I actually found myself only ever banishing 3 cards with this one now. So it is becoming less and less relevant for what I'm trying to do. But what I still like about Pot of Prosperity is the reveal can then lead me into multiple options. Yes, of course, I do have alternative options to kind of sub this out. Like I could go in with Map. The benefit of the Map is it gets me to a guaranteed starter. However, what I liked about Pot of Prosperity is when I activate it, it could show me Crossout, which will allow me to protect from certain hand trapped interactions. It would allow me to reveal maybe a Super Poly or a route to Super Poly. It could reveal a Throne. It just gave me a lot more options to kind of consider and open up what I was trying to look for, which is why I kind of still stuck with the Pot of Prosperity. But like I said, the extra deck was a little bit more tight this time, so there was a lot harder for me to choose 6 targets, let alone 3 targets. Like 3 targets was kind of ideal with what I was getting away with, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. I think I banished 6 once the entire tournament. So next up, I do of course have 1 for 1. Now I just really like this as a cool option because it kind of gave you that ability that if your Dark Beckoning did get impermed, if you do have that additional monster in the hand, activating 1 for 1 gets you into Samsara, and it's one of the ones where very rarely do they want that Samsara to hit the board. So if you do start with a 1 for 1, then more times than not will go Ash, and you're like, okay, cool, well I haven't needed to use my normal summon if I wanted to go down that route, and I'm still able to play. It's one of the ones that again some people do consider taking out or just not even playing at all. I personally think it's a great card for the deck, which is why I'm still utilising it. Then onto the hand traps. So the reason that this went up to a 45 card build is we were playing a lot more hand traps, or technically 4 more hand traps. But the idea is that obviously you're going to stick with your triple Ash Blossom. So the idea with this particular build is, like I said, we are playing cross out, so you do want to try and play the cards that you hard lose to, which is mainly your Ash Blossoms and your Imperms. So being able to utilize those in the matchup as well as being able to protect yourself from them is really, really important. The other cards that we decided to main was 2 Draw and Lockbird, purely because if that was the odd matchup where your opponent decided to main the Draw and Lockbird, this is another one of them hand traps that can be massively damaging. I highly expect Draw and Lockbird will go up to 3 into most decks. It will probably shift from more being a side card to a main deck card when the Fiendsmiths do come out, because the idea is that when they activate the Fiendsmith, or even if they are going to activate the little jellyfish, as soon as they add a card from their deck to the hand, you're going to want to draw them to stop them adding more cards and going off. Not to mention the Fiendsmiths, ideally you start off with your monster effect, discard that, search the spell. The spell wants to search to discard, and if you draw after they've used the monster effect to search the spell, it pretty much shuts that line down completely. It will depend on the format as to whether you want to main these or side these, but personally having them at 2 worked out perfectly fine for me. I saw it in game 1 against Snake Eyes, and that helped out massively, and it's kind of one of the ones that is also a target for me to protect with against Crossout, but it's also a card that can be more effective, which is why these 2 are at 2 and the next 2 are only at 1, so Veiler and Mourner. The idea behind both of these is, obviously last week Veiler was a card that I actually got hit with a couple of times, and it's something that caused me a few issues. So it's one that I kind of wanted to have that option to protect against should I open up something like a Crossout. The Mourner was just another one of them options that again a lot of people were using against me, but considering the first card or the ideal card that your opponent drops this on is the Spirit of Yubel, more times than not I had the Grave Squirmer in order to dodge it. But another card that it could be more effective against is if they hit a Yama with it, can be a bit of an annoyance, because if the Yama leaves, that's obviously going to be 2,000 burn damage, and that's something you need to be careful of, which is why, of course, I went with the 1 Mourner, with, of course, the counters to it being the triple Crossout and the 1 Called by the Grave, to kind of protect where at all possible. Arguably, Crossout is slightly better than Called by the Grave for the pure fact that it allows you to get to stuff like Nibiru's, and of course it can also get you with Imperms as well, which is massively helpful. Even in the Snake Eyes matchup, there was actually a time where they activated Cosmic Cyclone and decided to hit my Crossout rather than the Imperm, because it was a 50-50 chance, and I chained the Crossout, calling Ash Blossom early, and the reason I called the Ash Blossom was because I had Phantom of Yubel on the board. I wanted to make sure that they couldn't Ash Blossom the cards that I was trying to build the board up with, so that kind of gave you a bit of a foresight to protect a little bit more as well. So that's it for the entire main deck, 45 cards in total. Like I said, we kind of added in 2 Draw and Lockbirds and 1 Mourner, 1 Veiler to make it a 45 card deck. It was something that I wasn't completely against, going up to a 45 card deck. Yes, of course, the consistency gets a little bit tighter because you are adding more cards, so your mathematical value of drawing the cards you need is going to be lower. But the idea is that I've put the hand traps in so that even if I do open up multiple hand traps, I still have enough to kind of interact with my opponent anyway. And more times than not, I want to be burying the one-offs as they are cross-out targets in total. Moving on to the extra deck. So for the extra deck, of course, we are going to be playing 2 Phantom of Yubel. There was a couple of times today, sadly, that I was like, I really wish I had a third. And that was purely because a lot of times I was able to, or having to use the Phantom during the first turn. And then because I didn't want to end my turn without having a Phantom for my opponent's turn, I would make a second one. The only way that you can actually recycle the Phantom, annoyingly it being a level 9, is when one of your level 10 leaves the field via a card effect, because then you're able to go, okay, cool, Chainlink 1, that level 10 to float into, ideally in a Spirit of Yubel will float you into a Yubel, or of course you can float into a Terror Incarnate. Then of course use the field spell of Throne in order to add the Phantom back to the hand, which ultimately ends up going back to the extra deck. So that's a massively important interaction to know, and that's how you're going to be able to recycle your Phantoms, because unfortunately Phantom cannot shuffle itself back into the extra deck to summon out a second copy, which would have been incredibly broken if it could, but the fact that it cannot be used as future material outright is not just while it's on the field, but anywhere. It is a condition, not an activate or a continuous effect, so that is the big shame that you can't spin back your Phantom. And then of course we've got the one Loving Defender. Arguably I highly see this being taken out in the future, just because this is only in here now that we are using Super Poly. Once that Super Poly does not get used or is taken out, or when we get the Fiendsmith and you need a little bit more space, then you're going to take out the Yubel, the Loving Defender. This, of course, is a great option to get you a bit of time con burn damage, but again, in order to do that, you need to get to an Eternal Favourite or a Super Poly, which does require you to go through a lot of steps, so it isn't as effective or as consistent as you might like it to be. Before we get onto the Link monsters, because we do play a lot of them, we were playing 2 XYZ, so we're playing the 1 Triple D Wave Hiking, followed by the Varadus. Varadus actually puts in a lot of work, being able to be the rank 10 Omni Negate, not to mention the additional detach to pop any card on the field. Remember that, it doesn't just pop the card that negates its effect, you can do if you want to, but it does allow you to negate one card effect and then pop another with its effect. And of course we've got the 1 Chaos Angel. Now the idea behind the Chaos Angel is that if you were missing that level 10, rather than locking a Yubel under the Varadus, you could actually go with your Phantom and one of your level 1s, ideally being either Samsara Delotus or your Grey Squirmer, to make Chaos Angel, as you don't need a tuner, and then you would overlay both to go into the Varadus. I never made the Chaos Angel, and honestly the other option for this one is when you go second, you make it, you banish a card, and of course your Dark Monsters can't be destroyed by battle. It does give you a little bit more of an edge, but it's just one of them ones that not a lot of people would have expected it, not a lot of people see it coming, and it meant, like I said, that the Yubel isn't locked under the Varadus, but the issue is that you then use Phantom of Yubel as fodder, so you're not keeping that on the board, and that's how you burn through a second Phantom very easily in one turn, so it's something that you might want to consider. I definitely don't want to be going for 3 Phantom of Yubels, because the idea is that I think once we get the Fiendsmith, the extra deck will change again, and the space is going to get a lot tighter, and I feel that you could sacrifice a Phantom of Yubel at that point. So playing 2 is like the perfect ratio for now and in the future. So maybe the Chaos Angel isn't effective in this particular build, and it's something that I might want to take out, because I feel that I have enough access, even if I do lock a Yubel under the Varadus, to negate the first thing they activate, unless they use Dark Ruler no more, and then you cry a little bit inside. Moving on to the Link monsters. So for the Link monsters, because we were playing the 1 Muckraker. Muckraker is actually incredibly important in this build, because that's how you're going to be able to get your Fiends back from the grave. One of the Fiends, as a bit of a preview, you want to be bringing back could of course be a Nightmare Griffin, but I'll talk about this one a little bit later on once we get onto the Link 4s. Carrying on with the Link 2s, of course we do play the 1 SP Little Knight, like just an incredibly broken card in the game in general. Followed up by your Unchained cards of your 1 Unchained Soul Yama, your 1 Unchained Soul Rage, and then of course your 1 Unchained Soul Anguish. Now I never made Anguish at all because I never really went second, or when I did go second I didn't need to use the Anguish. I actually went into a Rage and then linked off with a Yama with the trap card, so I had it as a crackback follow-up should I need to. Arguably I could see myself playing a second Yama, just in order, because there are times when you would make a first Yama, put it to the graveyard, make a second Yama, and then it means you could use one of the destruction effects of Yama in the graveyard during your turn, and then use the other one during your opponent's turn. I never found myself in that position, which is why I've still got a 1-1-on-1, but it kind of works out nicely. And then of course we do play the fire line of the Princess and the Amberwell. So being able to play around Dark Ruler no more is really important, because the idea is that once you go down the Princess line, you're going to have Rage in the graveyard with the trap card ready to bring it back. Plus you'll have Princess as well. So you're just also trying to maintain your Yama in the graveyard, which is why I didn't go into the DDD as much, because the idea is wasn't about all putting everything onto the board, break it, you win, don't break it, you lose. It was more so, okay, well, I'm going to try and find the middle ground of balance of, if they do break it, I have crackback with 3 cards in the graveyard. If they don't break it, then they pretty much are going to lose that duel anyway. So it's kind of something that I needed to consider, and it did put in a lot of work, and you just need to get a bit more familiar with the Princess line and everything else that you do with it to make sure you don't end up locking yourself under it. And then of course for the last 2 Link 4s I was playing the one Appaloosa that I never made today, but there are uses when it does come up, and of course the Nightmare Griffin that I made once. The issue with the Nightmare Griffin is you need to make it under a Link monster that doesn't give your opponent a zone, and the only one that you really have right now that does that is the Muckraker, so that's something you need to consider. But the idea is that when you make this under the Muckraker, you're going to be able to discard a card, which will allow you to draw a card, and then also add back any spell from the graveyard. So if you have used something like True Tactic Talents, or heck, even if you went into your side deck and you discarded a D barrier, you then get to add the D barrier back, and you're good to go and be like just flexing your opponent a little bit more of, hey, I just drew one more card, and you know I've got a D barrier set that is going to absolutely stop your turn dead. So that's it for the entire extra deck and of course the main deck. I'm now going to go through the extra deck to show you what we've got. So for the side deck, I went with the board break, or I say board breakers, the back row hate of the 1 Duster and 2 Cosmics. Obviously this is because I took out the Lightning Storms, and the reason I took out the Lightning Storms was because I kept in the Fantastical Dragon Phantasme, which, against my better judgment, as much as I was trying to considering taking it out and not putting it put in a huge amount of work. This put in a lot of work because it gave me that ability to draw into something like Shifter, and on top of that it had that built-in protection from targeted effects, especially when I was up against Snake Eyes matchup and of course Evil Eye matchup, and they wanted to go either SP to target, SP to target, or they wanted to go for a Rage to link off. The Phantasma actually put in a lot of work to discard a card in order to set up my graveyard for a Phantom play as well as protect. Not to mention that it replaced itself, it put a boss monster on the board for me with protection, so that if they wanted to try and imperm my Dark Beckoning Beast, I could play around it. If they wanted to Veiler it, or if they wanted to try and stop my Samsara D Lotus with anything apart from an Ash that targeted it, I had another line of protection that my opponent needed to worry about. The other cards that this card could draw me into that would put in a huge amount of work in certain matchups will of course Dimension Shifter, and of course Nibiru. Now Nibiru was one of them cards that I was like, how is Nibiru going to sit in this upcoming format? And ultimately I felt that Nibiru needed to be in here, and it ended up winning me a game against the Ritual Beast matchup, because it's just kind of one of them ones where more times than not they'll either run the risk of maybe my opponent doesn't have Nibiru and I'm just going to go with it anyway, or they'll run that risk of they can't actually protect from Nibiru, and if they have it, it's going to be game over. So Nibiru put in a huge amount of work, which is why I did make sure that it got put into the deck. It's still one of them cards that's in the grey area of how effective is it, but the card that I took out for it was of course Skill Drain. And then moving on to the final cards for the extra deck, I went with 2 D Barrier and the 1 Droll. Now ultimately if Droll gets into a format where you're going to be main decking all 3 Drolls, then of course that's something you're going to want to consider, and that's where you'll probably put in 3 D Barrier. Again, it really will come down to the environment you're going to. The way I kind of looked at it was Snake Eyes could play around the Skill Drain, so it's not really a card that is that effective going in against them, whereas D Barrier really does shut down Tempeyes. It can shut down Ritual Beast sometimes, it can shut down Yubel in the mirror match because it means they don't need to worry about Phantom, and then in some of the other matchups that I might have faced that day as well, like Melodious and of course the Chimera, then D Barrier would have put in a bit of work as well, which is why I ultimately decided to go with those. So it's one of the ones of how effective are some of these side deck cards in the matchups, whether you're going to put them in or put them out. Of course, if I choose not to play Phantasme going further forward, then I could consider putting Lightning Storm back into the deck, but ultimately I thought that Phantasme, as much as I wanted to get rid of it, it just put in so much work. A lot of people didn't expect it, and then when it did hit the board, those draws were pretty invaluable, and it allowed me to put cards back into the deck that I maybe didn't want in my hand, or saw them as free ditch fodder or anything else that I kind of didn't need. It's definitely, again, more of a matchup specific one. Like, obviously it's going to be great against Snake Eyes, it's dead against Chimera Illusion because it doesn't do anything. It can be good against Yubel because then of course it will turn off their targeted effects. It'll also give you protected from their targeted effects as well, which is really, really important. So it really does come down to the environment and what you think you're going to be facing as to whether or not you feel that something like Phantasme is effective or not. Like I said, the last week when I played it, it was very effective because it went Phantasme into Shifter. This week when I played it, it was very effective because it gave me a mini boss monster on the board that allowed me to out stuff like SP Little Knight if they tried to set that up, but it also allowed me to out stuff like Unchained Soul of Rage, and then of course anything else that would target my cards like Imperms and Veilers and everything else. So that's it for the entire profile, side deck, main deck, extra deck, you name it, it's been done. If you do have any questions at all, by all means, please put them in the comments down below. I will be more than happy to answer them for you. I'm going to continue updating this deck every time I've played it at locals to give you kind of a local review of how it's worked. And then that hopefully will give you as much information whether you're going to be facing Yubel or if you're looking to build it and put it together yourself. With all that out of the way, thank you so much for watching. Do like, comment, subscribe, share. Till next time, as absolutely always, stay safe and of course, happy dueling.